Hi, it's Lori Neverman from Common Sense Homesteading, and today I'm going to teach you how to cook a pumpkin. And I'd like to dedicate this video to my friend Eric, who messaged me earlier this week asking how to do exactly that. So here we have an assortment of winter squash and pumpkin. They're all the same species, but just different varieties, so they can pretty much be used interchangeably in recipes. When I'm baking and cooking, I generally prefer to use most of the other winter squash varieties over a typical pie pumpkin, and I'll get to that in a minute and show you why. But they're all baked pretty much the same. So I'm going to set this one aside, and I'm going to butcher these two so that you can see what's going on here. So let me see. So in the Garden Fresh Vegetable Cookbook, Andrea Chessman says that you may have a tough time getting into some of your bigger winter squash because their skins are so tough. And she actually talks about taking them outside and dropping them on concrete or microwaving them for a couple minutes, letting them rest, and then taking a cut because the skins are so tough. But pumpkins tend to be, that's one of their saving graces, that they do tend to be pretty easy to cut through. So if you take a look at the inside of your typical pie pumpkin, you notice it has a fairly thin ring of flesh and then your seed cavity. And to bake this, I'm going to clean out all the seeds and goobers inside and then set that down. I've got a broiler pan, and I'm going to set that down on the broiler pan, cut side down, put it in a 350-degree oven, and bake that for about 45 minutes to an hour until you can poke the skin easily with the fork. So next up, I'm going to butcher the winter squash. Now, a lot of winter squash tend to have tougher skin, so I actually pre-cut this a little bit so I didn't end up stabbing myself on camera. I believe this is a Jarndale, and it actually splits fairly easy, which makes it a little easier to bust into. Now if you look at, grab that one. Let me see if I can get these pointing to the camera nicely. Now if you look at the flesh color of the pie pumpkin versus the winter squash, the Jarndale winter squash, you can see that the flesh in the winter squash is darker and it tends to be denser. You can't really see that too well on the camera. And it's a little bit thicker along that bottom edge, whereas opposed to the pumpkin where you've got a pretty thin ring of flesh all the way around the pumpkin. So I really generally prefer using winter squash for baking because the fruit is sweeter and richer and less watery, so you don't end up with watery pies and fillings, and you don't have to use as much sugar. Okay, so next up, we're going to clean out the seeds and get them ready to go in the oven. Again, this will cook in the oven on a pan, cut side down, about 1 inch of water for 45 minutes to an hour at 350 degrees. So here we go. I'm going to do some goober scooping. And generally, it's not too tough to get these seeds out of here. If you got a grapefruit spoon, that can help because of course it's got that serrated edge that digs into the flesh just a little bit and helps get that loose. But I just have a regular big honking serving spoon that I'm using here. Scoop those aside. Of course you can, so we've got clean pumpkin, and set that down. And then if you want, you can clean up the seeds and remove the stringy bits, the connective tissue, and soak them in salt water, drain them, and roast them to make roasted pumpkin seeds. Usually ours go to the chickens or the duckies because they like these ones that still have holes more than I do. But we actually grow hulless pumpkin seeds that we like for pepitas much better. And I'll probably cover those in another video if you would like. Leave a comment and let me know. All right, side number 2. And that's set aside. Get another pan ready. One thing about the winter squash is they can be just a little bit tougher to clean out, but because they're a little bit sturdier on the inside. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's nice. And stuff flying everywhere. In the interest of keeping this brief, I'm gonna scoop quick and a little bit messy. All right, almost done. And it doesn't matter if there's a few little loose strings hanging, no big deal. All right, so we have side number 1. Face down on baking sheet. Side, clean that side. Now once you get your pumpkin cooked or your squash cooked, you want to take that out of the oven and let it cool until you can handle it. And then you scoop the softened flesh out of the skin and compost that or feed it to your critters. And typically before I use it in recipes, I do like to puree my squash or pumpkin, run it through the blender or food processor a little bit, because sometimes there will be chunks depending on the variety and how well it's cooked. So that just helps give your finished baked goods like your pumpkin pies or muffins or pancakes or whatever a little smoother consistency. If you don't mind a few chunkin lumps, pumpkin chunks, then you don't have to puree. You can just mash it with a fork and use it in your recipe. So number 2, and then I will get these in the oven. I will add my water right close to the stove so you're not running across your kitchen with a big pan full of water. So I'll set these on my stove top, dump the water in, and then load them into the oven. All right, so I'm gonna pour some water into the bottom of the pan, and somewhere around a ½ inch. This is tilted a little bit. You just don't want it to bake dry while it's in the oven, because then the sugars of the pumpkin can easily scorch and burn. So keep an eye on it. If you have a shallower pan and can't put a full inch of water, just check it about midway through baking so that it doesn't cook dry. And carefully slide it in. And that's all there is to it. And always set the timer and check on it in about 45 minutes. All right, so here we are. We have the pie pumpkin on the left and the Gerondale squash on the right. And I see this is fork tender. The fork goes in easily. I'm going to flip these over so you can compare. Nope. You don't want to go the right direction. All right, let me see if we can get these slid around. I'm going to have to wash my hot pads, man. All right. So we have pumpkin and squash. You can see that's a lot darker, and it also tends to be a lot sweeter. Now to prep this for making your pumpkin pies. Now normally I'd let this cool off a little bit, but I'm on a bit of a tight schedule here and we want to get this demonstrated. So, woohoo, this is going to be fun. My husband says I have to do this so people can see what it's like to scoop the flesh out of the pumpkin. So, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this hot. You can see it's plenty done. It's plenty tender. You just scrape that away from the skin. And, basically you don't want to punch through the skin, but everything up to that is perfectly edible. And so I'm going to take this and I'm going to put that in the blender and hit frappe. And that is all you have to do to make your own homemade pumpkin puree.